for business updates across the African continent. Rutus Odiri is here.
All right, good morning.
Afolabi.
Good morning, doctor.
In case anybody forgot that your name.
Exactly.
That your fans gave you.
They shouldn't forget. Good morning. Yes, so indeed. The ways and means, there's been an update with respect to the central bank financing that has been extended to the federal government. They plan to securitize that debt, and essentially what they're going to be, when you're securitizing an asset, you are essentially trying to make it more palatable to mainstream investors. So we're looking at what is being understood to be a 40-year bond where they will convert this ways and means financing, which again for our viewers is financing that has been extended from the central bank to the federal government to assist in its revenue challenges. Now, of course, remember this, does fall afoul of the Finance Act, CBN Act, with respect to the amount of money extended to the federal government from the central bank not to exceed 5% of the prior year's revenues. And if you had to use that cap, it should be not be more than 300-400 million that should be extended. But instead, or a billion, excuse me. Instead, we've got about 4.3 trillion that's been extended to the federal government so far this year. And look, let's talk about this now. Look at our total public debts, 42.8 trillion naira as of June the 30th. This does not include the 20 trillion that has been extended since 2015 up until about September or August of this year to the government. So now, if you add that, you're looking at over 60 trillion. Then I look at our deficit of 10 trillion. That ways and means is 2x our deficit. Look at debt service at 6.3 trillion. None of this includes ways and means. So will investors pick up on this 40-year bond? That's to be seen, because there's a question as to how that can be serviced. And another thing, when we talk about putting debts on future generations,
that's a revenue projection.
Right, projection,
not the revenue.
Exactly.
And we always fall short, close to 50% below projection.
But liabilities are one we do well on that, so expenditure.
Projection.
And both of you have talked about putting debts on future generations. I was talking to somebody about this ways and means thing this morning. They said, no, 40 years is too long. They should pay it off in 10 years. And I thought to myself, you want to pay off 20 trillion naira in 10 years. That's what, 2 trillion a year. Where do you even find the revenue to try to service this kind of debt? So now, if you think about debt service versus capital expenditure, I think capital expenditure in the 2023 budget is about 5 trillion. Your debt service exceeds your capital expenditure. That is just paying your interest on your debt. So you can imagine, what kind of strain this now puts on the next administration. By the way, Patience Oniha, I think she sent a text to Bloomberg where she said that this still has to go through the proper channels, where it's got to pass through Parliament and get approval and so on and so forth. So, again, this is just a fallout from the continued revenue challenges. You can talk about how subsidies have eaten up revenue and so on and so forth. And, this is now falling onto the next administration. So, again, it really does emphasize the need for all the candidates that are running for office, how they plan to address, all these issues. Some better news, if we move away from this. Here's a tweet from the ICT minister, digital economy minister, Professor Issa Pantami. His Excellency President Buhari has just assented to the Nigeria Startup Bill. It's now become the Nigeria Startup Act. It was an executive bill initiated by both Office of the Chief of Staff and the Office of the Minister of Communications and Digital Economy. Congrats to all. And there's images and so on of the signing ceremony where the president will sign the bill, and Issa Pantami there is, is smiling really heavily. And so essentially, look, this Startup Act is for the tech ecosystem that is supposed to have a marriage between value creators, tech entrepreneurs, and also regulators. So there's a consultative a forum a panel that is going to be looking over regulation for the startups. President Buhari is part of that panel. Issa Pantami is as well. I think the central bank governor is as well. And so finance and so. I understand, I think a seed capital of about 10 billion that's supposed to be housed with the NSIA, which is supposed to be reviewing capital that's supposed to be sent over to use to assist startups startups. So it's this has been long in the making. Private sector was part of this, the government was part of this, and so he signed that. Finally, South Africa, the Financial Service Conduct Authority, has officially in a publication yesterday recognized cryptocurrencies as financial products. So what's going to happen going forward is that they will treat cryptocurrencies as financial products in order to bring them under the regulatory umbrella. I think we have a quote from the general manager of Africa for Luno, which is a cryptocurrency platform. He says the licensing requirements that will flow from this classification will drive high standards in the industry, particularly in relation to consumer protection, with potential investors easily able to identify those providers that satisfy regulatory requirements. Another key benefit is that it should allow financial advisors to formally advise their clients on crypto investments. So, South Africa is, recognizing that, and they're moving forward with that respect.
I mean, if you're still doubting that digital assets in terms of monetary, relations will take over the world, then like Nigerian popular artist The Band used to say back in the days, no long thing. You're sitting on a long thing.
Right.
Because it's here to stay. And that's when you look at the trajectory, that's the evolution of money. Should we go from Venice, where you had the Jewish traders that sat on benches that changed money and currency?
Yeah.
The benches they sat on was called banque, that led to the word bank, because bank were actually the benches they sat down on. To when they had to fight wars in the 1700s that they couldn't create money. And guess what the Dutch bankers did? The Dutch were quite very innovative. They started bond markets, that everybody picked up bond market. Napoleonic War fought with bond. So money has always evolved to the Ming Dynasty when they changed to paper money from cowrie and baht and things like that. Technological evolution is the way forward.
Amen.
Cryptocurrency, digital currency, everything in the digital space will change the world.
Yep.
Yes, although it started like a joke from Satoshi Nakamoto with Bitcoin and all of that, but it has changed the world, and that's what the South Africans have just understood. And a lot of this will herald the change of the world. I mean, I was in New York the day the Winklevoss brothers launched the first crypto exchange. I think that was in December 2018.
Yeah.
And you could see the excitement. So it's here to stay. The question is, when are we going to jump on the bandwagon? I know the problem with the central banks, regulation and all of that. They don't want to get burst.
Nigeria's SEC has put up a framework to recognize crypto.
Another good one on President Buhari, and congratulations to him. I'm objective enough. When he does well, I tell him he does well. The startup bill, good one. So they're going to have two things. They're going to have a council that all the big people you mentioned, finance minister and all of that. Then they're going to have a forum. But even on the council, they're going to be representative of the forum. They're going to get on it, and what they do is create an enabling system, categorize and label startups, be able to get funding and access to them. There's a fund on ground for them to be able to tap into 10 billion. That can also be increased. Also, I think they could also take some things from the Jonathan administration with Idea Hub, make availability of hubs all over the country so that innovation can be in situ in various locales, put this part of the big robust regulatory framework. And it's easy for them. So when they can label the companies, they can file tax returns easily and they can make that money. So good one to Pantami, good one to President Buhari on this, good one to Inua on this. It's a good one that people have fought for all this while. So there's that synergy. So when I'm talking about innovation, there's that sandbox. So I can easily talk to people in it that, okay, make this, ensure that we can get the CBN on board to quickly make this law because this is what I'm doing in the finance space. Good one, kudos. I'm happy about this.
Okay, the startup bill to start with. Yes, it's a very good development. Nigeria is the most robust startup ecosystem in Africa. This year alone, over $1 billion, right? Coming from Nigeria. And you have groups like Now, like Duplo, like Pastel, like all the other companies you mentioned here, Flutterwave, and they are doing very well. They've demonstrated potential. It's good that the Nigerian government has now reached a point where the president has signed into law a bill to provide the legal framework for startups ecosystem in Nigeria and to encourage the innovation that we have seen, the creativity that we have seen, and to deepen the the potentials that we're seeing. Even more important, beyond providing the legal framework, the enabling framework, is also the decision of the Nigerian government to launch a special seed fund of about $3.8 billion to encourage, startups in Nigeria. So at the end of the day, the office of the chief of staff, we're told, and the office of, is it the Minister of Finance? Or
ICT,
the Minister of the Digital Economy. Both have now been told that they should pay close attention to it. And Nigerian youths, who are the frontliners in that particular sector, will also be encouraged by this. Because oftentimes we sit here, we say, oh, Nigeria does not want to encourage innovation or anything that young people want. Okay, this is a demonstration that in this particular regard, our government is on the side of the youths. Okay, fine. And I hope that it is something that will be continued by the next administration. Whatever the color of that administration may be, the creativity, the innovativeness of the youth of Nigeria in this sector, digital economy, which has become very important. The second issue that you raised has to do with ways and means.
Yes.
Mrs. Zainab Ahmed told us that, they will securitize it and all of that, and, bonds will be paid over a period of, was it 50 years?
4 decades, 40 years,
40
doctor,
years.
40 years.
So what it means is that ways and means, maybe a handmaiden, a method that you use sometimes when you have financial issues, you deal with it quickly. You print money. This government has printed more money than at any time in the history of Nigeria. 20 trillion, right?
20 trillion.
So who is going to pay for that?
Apparently it's you and me.
What it means, no, including my grandchildren.
Exactly.
And your own children.
Exactly.
What it means is that for the next 40 years, we'll be paying for the level of debt and borrowing and deficit that this government has created. That's simply what Zainab Ahmed has told us. So this government, what she's saying, in my view, those who think they know banking, finance, economics, let them come and tell us. But we will use common sense to say that what they have simply done is to throw all of us, children, grandchildren, and we, who are still alive today, into debt for the next 40 years. Right. Is that how to run an economy? Is that how to configure the future? These are the questions that Nigerians should ask, including those people who collect 20,000 naira per month and they just talk, absolute nonsense without having any ideas about anything. So that for me is a message from Zainab Ahmed. Okay?
Indeed,
so
indeed it is, Doctor.
Your children, they will pay debts.
Okay,
my children and grandchildren, they will pay debts.
Oh boy, these decisions.
Oh dear, oh dear.
Oh dear, indeed. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Rotos. For Global Business Update, Michael Wilson is back now from London to join us. Good morning, Michael.
I was listening to your conversation with a great deal of interest. Just before I hit the markets, there is one little bit of market knowledge that I will share with you, that if you can't work out who's paying for something, it's probably you. That's the bit of wisdom that I would pass on about printing money. If you can't work out who's paying for it, your answer is it's you, your children, and your grandchildren. I've always said that. Couldn't agree more. Right, let's go to the markets then. Hong Kong at a 13-year low this morning. Really worries about economic problems, but more importantly, I think in Hong Kong, I was reporting what the new-ish President John Lee was saying in his first sort of publicized speech, and what he didn't do was actually say to people, although he wants to gather more talent to Hong Kong, what he's not saying is, or he didn't say, anything satisfactory about the economic progress of the country as a whole. It's effectively, the whole place is effectively in recession. and its COVID policy was still fairly tough. It's not as tough as it was. It's not like zero COVID in China, but the fact of the matter is that it's been had some of the toughest coronavirus lockdowns, and that's the reason why Hong Kong stocks were down today. Mainland China markets also slightly lower, bearing in mind, of course, that their communist symposium is still continuing. Japan, let's turn our attention to the third largest economy in the world. Their imports have been surging on the back of a weaker yen. Now, a weaker yen used to be quite good for Japan in terms of it being an exporting country. But at the moment, the worry is that it's making imports, a weaker yen is making imports more expensive, and it's fueling fears of inflation there. So what was once welcomed as been making Japan competitive is now seen hurting householders and retailers by importing the already high prices that the population is paying for fuel and food. Let us turn our attention to the United States, and the Nasdaq 100 futures mixed after a 2-day rally. Yesterday, basically the major averages, what is described by the Americans as snapping a 2-day winning streak. I mean, it's pretty obvious, isn't it? Investors were also looking at treasury yields to try to work out whether they should be staying there, whether they should be going treasuries, and also worrying about inflation as well. Again, the Fed's in control of this. Now, Elon Musk, he's never out of the headlines for long, and he's been forced to brush aside some of the investor concerns about Tesla. The third quarter earnings, not too bad, and so on. But earnings per share is not too good. He's saying that the company is, and I'll quote him, very pedal to the metal at the moment. And regarding the 44 billion acquisition of Twitter, he said the company had been languishing a long time. Its adjusted earnings were $1.05 a share, which topped analysts' estimations about it. But the revenue itself wasn't too good, and he's battling with investors now to try to convince them that Tesla is going to be the thing of the future. Well, according to sources in London, that's all very well, but it's still going to suffer from supply chain problems in the same way that most electrical vehicle manufacturers are, namely the particular metals that are going to be used in the batteries which power them. Jeff Bezos, what do you think he is? The second richest man in the world? He's been warning again about the economy in the United States. He's saying it's time to batten down the hatches. The probabilities in this economy, batten down the hatches. That's what he's saying right now. We turn to the UK and the government in more disarray. The Interior Minister, the Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, has now gone. Grant Shapps, who was a Transport Secretary, is in to replace her. The thing about Grant Shapps is that he notably did not back Liz Truss in the Prime Minister's stakes when she took power. And yesterday, of course, inflation hitting that 40-year high of 10.1%. And I put it to me that the political chaos is making the economic problems of the UK actually worse than they would be normally. Naturally, the unions are very worried about the wages and so on. And the UK government was going to bring in plans to try to ensure some kind of minimum service if there were transport strikes. There probably will be. The union has been calling those plans actually doomed. And finally, on oil, President Biden, now, if I was we were talking about it yesterday, he put up for purchase 15 million of barrels of oil from their strategic reserve. He's been actually saying to oil companies, why don't you ramp up production instead of, and so we can cut prices at the pump. That suggests to me he's very, very concerned about the midterm elections. But the oil market basically is all over the place. And profits at the 6 largest publicly traded oil companies topped $70 billion in the second quarter. And he's definitely got his eyes on them, because what he wants to do is to make sure that holy grail of the American economy, the ability to to drive to places and not pay too much at the pumps. He's going to continue to do that, he's saying, until the price hits $70 a barrel. Well, I think a lot of people in the oil market would say, good luck with that. That's the global view. Nice to be back with you.
And that's a big problem, Michael. A lot of people are complaining that Joe Biden is spending too much and is doing too much. The release of excess oil out of the strategic reserves and the spending on the economy, that American economy will start to hot up again. And you're seeing those numbers in inflation, a 40-year high of inflation. Isn't it time for Joe Biden to be realistic? You know, isn't it time for the scrappy kid from Scranton to be realistic with these economic measures, not just thinking about the midterm elections and all of that? And in the UK, I'd like to ask, so what is the cost to that last week of horror in the UK? They are saying they spent 10 billion. The Bank of England is saying they've got another 65 billion to buy back bonds, you know, to be able to keep the pensions afloat. What is the cost? Have they been able to bring out a cost to all of the madness that happened with Trussonomics?
I don't know whether you can imagine what $10 billion looks like. I can't. And £10 billion looks like. I don't know what £6 billion looks like. What I do know is that much more importantly, those are big figures, and they are bearing down on government borrowing. But I would much rather turn to people who are, as a result of all this, are paying higher mortgages. And it's not just because of the war in Ukraine, but it's because of direct mismanagement of the economy. That's number one. Businesses, particularly small businesses, and you've been talking about the entrepreneurial spirit in Nigeria earlier on in the program. Same thing in the UK, and they are the majority of employers. They do not know what's going to happen with this. They don't even know whether the Prime Minister is going to survive until lunchtime today. That's what the problem is. So, you know, this is really bringing home the problems of the much wider problems of the gilt markets and so on, and the bond market. And again, if you talk to people in the street, you talk to people on the doorstep, they're not interested in that. They're interested in the cost of living. They're interested in the cost of food. Fuel, not so much now, but certainly the cost of food. Those inflation figures biting hard yesterday, take-home pay actually falling, and what their employers, the majority of whom are small businesses, are actually going to do with all this uncertainty. That's where the reality actually lies in the UK economy, as I suspect it does in most economies as well. As far as Joe Biden spending money, look, I don't know. What do I know? He's a politician. He may change his mind tomorrow. Of course, he's got his eyes on the midterms. I mean, that's all he's able to think about at the moment. Because if they don't do well in those, then they're not going to push any kind of administrative changes through the two houses. So, I mean, he's got to be looking at that, and that's what this oil, the selling off of the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, of course, is all about that.
Okay, I mean, the releasing. More fuel from the strategic reserve in the U.S. was unexpected response from the U.S. In response to what the OPEC Plus decided. But you quoted Jeff Bezos saying we should batten down the hatches. With inflation rising from about 2% to 8.2%, you now have Joe Biden saying, household finances are healthy, unemployment is down, more people are getting jobs, and that what is happening in the U.S., according to him, is healthy. What do you expect from politicians? Politicians will always be optimistic. Okay, but that's that about that. I wanted to ask you two quick things. One, China. The Chinese, while we are waiting for their monthly trade data and also for GDP data, they've decided to hold down LPR, an accommodative stance. What do you think is responsible for that? What do you think of that? Two, Suella Braverman, she resigned or she was pushed, whatever it was. The deputy chief whip and the chief whip in the House of Commons resigned and unresigned. Do you think that Prime Minister Liz Truss will survive by weekend?
I think she will struggle to survive by lunchtime today. Never mind the weekend. That's the kind of political noises that are coming out. I was looking at the coverage yesterday, and the political commentators were at a loss to understand what was going on. You're absolutely right. The chief whip, the sort of enforcer of the Conservative Party, did resign apparently, and then she came back, and Liz Truss was seen chasing after her. I mean, there were total scenes of absolute confusion yesterday in the House of Commons, and it's not very edifying. I mean, that is the problem. She may well be gone by lunchtime. I mean, it could be that serious. That's the kind of thing that we're facing right now. And businesses are scratching their heads, saying, "Well, what is this government? What are its policies right now?" I mean, it's clear that if you want to put one sort of broad thing over everything, it is that, as it stands at the moment, the Tory party has been captured by the left of the Tory party. Now, how long that lasts, how long she lasts, just don't know. But that appears to be the move that's actually happening. Very little of that mini budget that was supposed to bring growth has actually happened, and most of it's been reversed.
Well, I asked you about China and their PR rate that they have taken an accommodative stance on. Twice in a month.
I mean, they're trying to do that, but I would reiterate what I always feel about China. The property problem is not going to go away. The demographic problem is not going to go away. The markets suspect that one of the reasons they've not released the figures is to interrupt their Communist conference. The Communist Party of China's annual conference with bad news. So the suspicion is that these figures aren't very good. Now, if you add to that, what I was saying yesterday is that President Xi was saying we're no longer the poster children of rapid growth. We don't need that. What we need is sustainable growth. Now, whether that's got something to do with these figures, I simply don't know. We may well hear, we may not. But at the moment, we can only judge, as we always do with the things that come out of China at the moment. And their silence, I think, speaks a lot about what's actually going in the economy, which I suspect is a gradual slowdown.
Okay, thank you very much, Michael.